Thank you for tuning in to Koppen with Comic. I'm Brian Koppen. We're here with comic Emily Maverick Shankman. Emily Maverick Shankman, how the hell are you?
Hey, I'm doing pretty well this morning. How are you doing?
Doing good. Thank you so much for coming on and let us know your socials. I know I follow you everywhere. Are you Emily Maverick or Emily Shankman? What name can we find down on
Yeah,
socials?
I am Emily_Maverick on all my Twitter and Instagram and TikTok.
Yeah. So now, what made you decide that you were the Maverick rather than the Shankman?
Yes, so actually, Maverick is my middle name. So my great, I think it might be three to four greats, grandfather, Samuel Maverick, was the first person to ever raise cows without a brand. And so that is why we know Maverick to be some sort of rebellious nature going against the traditional status quo. So I think that's a pretty cool origin story of the name. And I like to embody being a little bit alternative and going against what's expected of me.
Well, that leads me to the next question, which is how are you displaying your Maverick tendency and your genetics, your Maverick genetics for your upcoming projects that you're excited about?
Yeah, so I'm doing a lot of different things. I think in terms of how I express my inner maverick, it's probably doing a million different things that sometimes seem unrelated, but to me, they all kind of fit together in a puzzle that excites me and feels very dynamic. So I just recently wrapped up making a short film for a short film competition, and it just made it into the top 20, and it will be screened next week. And it's a very interesting film that I feel like explores a lot of different genres. So it kind of has this Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind meets Black Mirror kind of surreal aspect. And I really liked exploring that aspect of my mind and creative interests. It
Well,
wasn't,
yeah, what's the name? What's the name of the plot? Is that the Oh That's
yeah,
Bleak here on Instagram or no?
it's not. So
Okay.
it's going to be, yes, that is another project that
Okay.
was a fun thing that my friend and I were always seeing bleak content everywhere. And
And you
it got a
liked it or
little
you
too
disapproved or you liked it?
it got a little too real once the pandemic hit. I will say that it was a lot more funny when things were a bit more stabilized and we were pointing out some of the bleak nature in the world. But it was a fun project. I haven't updated it in a bit, but this, yes,
You're like, it is way too bleak to point out what's
it's
bleak about this
yeah, it was
bleakness. Yeah.
starting to bring us a little too far down. So
Yeah,
yes.
I had Nick Waversky on, and he has kind of a famous dog account, and he said he stopped posting it during the pandemic because he thought nobody wanted to see dog videos. I'm just like, dude, that's what we need to see at the
You
most.
need that. Yes. Yeah, that's the non-bleak content that we want for
You'll have
sure.
a new spinoff. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
that's the opposite of bleak or something.
exactly.
So, what's the name of the film and kind of what's its
Yeah.
plot, real quick?
Yeah, so it's called microdosing you. And the
Oh,
idea is that we can take a pill that mimics another person's sensory experience. So maybe their the way they see the world, the way they hear, and the way they feel, but you still have your own thoughts. And so in this particular short, I explored that with a couple who was fighting and seeing how it helped them understand each other a little bit more. And I hope to, it's kind of more of a concept piece for a larger idea. I want to build it out to see how it can have different effects, like somebody taking too much of somebody or taking two people at the same time. And just,
ah.
it is a fun jumping off place, I think, for a lot of different uh, little vignettes into how experiencing someone else's sensory experience could help or harm things.
Yeah, that is really cool because it's like you're so me your whole life that to be able
Yeah,
to take a pill just, and get somebody else's kind of take on things because you're going to come out of that being like, dude, why the fuck is this your worldview? I mean, mine is totally
right.
opposite because then you can kind of discuss it and be like, that seems bizarre that your underlying assumptions of everything is this, that, and the other when I assume the opposite. And it would really kind of
Exactly.
teach everybody just, I don't know, to be less worried about things and less also cause people to be less excited about things because your expectations would be, you're like, why the hell does that excite you? What a stupid centering experience you have. I mean, yeah, it's totally
Right.
just if it's right for comedy. So who came up with that idea? You?
I did. Yeah, I absolutely did. So
That's Maverick. Yeah,
it
you
is
don't need to say
Maverick.
anymore. That is so Maverick. I mean, I know Emily Maverick is a Maverick because of that idea. I mean, yeah, nobody's done it before, and when it comes to a good idea like that, you're like, how the fuck has nobody done it before? And it's just like, yeah, everybody was branding their cattle until your great
Yeah.
great 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 grandfather come along.
You know what? Exactly. That's very true. I love it.
So that's cool. And then real quick, what we're going to be talking about is kind of what you touched on with the whole, you being interested in kind of seemingly opposite things, and you're going to tie them together for me and teach me that they're not opposite at all. And that was one of the topics was kind of setting boundaries and how you're kind of you might be getting better at that. But then the other idea is clowning. You've gotten into clowning, and I would think that as a clown you would need to kind of break through people's defenses with, I don't know, goofiness or whatever, just kind of insert yourself into their life to make them happier, and that kind of seems to be breaking down boundaries. So how'd you get interested in both? Do they scratch different itches, and so are they opposite or not really?
Interesting. Yes, I love that. So, in terms of boundaries, I think just as a person growing up, I've always been extremely kind and sometimes had terrible boundaries because I just empathize with what people are going through and I don't want anyone to be feeling bad.
It's
And
like,
I
yes, you're treating me like shit because you're in a bad place. All right, yeah,
exactly.
carry on.
Yes. So it gets difficult for me to kind of have boundaries within my life because I absorb people's energies or I try to, accommodate or I'm always afraid I'm offending somebody, which is not helpful in comedy and is something I'm always breaking through because we got to be edgy and say what we want to say and be ourselves. Uh, and also protecting my time. So, a lot of, people when we're artists, we have to make sure to tend to our inner artist and give ourselves time to think and create and write and just do what we need to do to thrive. But in a world where we're always just being asked to do things or
Yeah.
wanting to help others, it can be really easy to get swept away into just spending time with other people and maybe kind of leaking my energy and not feeling restored as a person. And then always trying to evaluate, is this something that really lights me up that I want to do? Or am I doing this because I want to make somebody happy, which is a good impulse to want to make others happy. But I have to make sure it's not at the expense of
Yeah.
what I need to do and what my dreams or visions or needs are. So that's something, it's going to probably be a lifelong thing that I'm working on. But
And is that
just,
kind of everywhere? I mean, is that in, because I mean, as an artist, you probably are not just an artist, you're an artist. You probably have some sort of, something that makes a lot more money than
yes.
comedy, maybe fueling all these things, but also personal life. So has it been kind of, personal family life? Has it been romantic stuff? Has it been
Yeah,
professional?
all
And
of
has
the
artist,
above.
all of the above? Oh my God.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. So
I
trying
hope
to
you didn't
find
feel
that.
like you had to come on this podcast. You were saying yes to be nice.
No, I was, this lit me up. So I gotta, yes. But it definitely, it's amazing. I mean, I'm so jealous of people who, when they have to say no to something, they're just like, no, I can't do that or
Yeah.
something. And for me, it's this whole process. And mixed in with that is also not always just people pleasing, but also me as a person. I want to do everything. I
Oh,
have huge FOMO. I want to experience everything. I don't like to say no to things because you never know what you're going to discover. I want to say yes to most things, but that can get out of control when you have a limited amount of time. So accepting the limitations of time and space is very frustrating for me. I would love to just have infinite possibilities, but limitations.
but I think I've been kind of the opposite, which is, and I glad it's cool that you kind of link setting boundaries to FOMO, because I've been always kind of the opposite, where I only choose experiences which are kind of reliably enjoyable. And so
Yeah.
if it's like an opportunity that comes up, oh, let's go skydiving. It's like, well, what if I love it? Then I want to go to skydiving all the time. Or it's like traveling too. It's like, why would I, take a trip to Paris when I could live in Paris? Like I don't want to find a great cafe in the Rue de blah 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 blah, by the Eiffel Tower if I'm never able to go there again. And so I've always been kind of clear in saying no to a lot of things because I want to control my own experience such that it's replicable. Whereas like, I'm doing things that I love to do every single day. And so it's very easy to say no. And I mean, for me, because I have no FOMO, but also I think it's kind of in, I'm also kind of a big, I was kind of an argument champion. And so something that comes up with being an argument champion in law school is like, a lot of times you kind of agree a little bit. You've seen articles being like, well, it helps to disagree with people if you're also agreeing a little bit. So a lot of times in
Totally.
saying no to people, I'm like, well, I would do this, that, and the other, but I won't do this because of this. So it's like somebody wants me to help them move. It's like, well, I would help you pay a mover $50 if you need
Right.
some money, but I won't do this. And then they're like, oh, Brian is actually being reasonable here. He's just not knee jerk and categorically saying no, absolutely no.
Yeah, that's a nice middle ground. I like that. I might use that for my journey into figuring out how to set reasonable boundaries. But yeah,
But it's
that's really
also like,
interesting.
it's interesting. Like I also kind of push back on the notion that being edgy in comedy is, kind of a necessary evil, especially when you have kind of an idiosyncratic inner life as you seem to have. Because I had Andrew Chavone and Stephen Rogers on the podcast, and they have I don't know, a podcast called like Podcast Anxiety or some shit, and it's really and people love it because before an episode they'll be like, "What's been making you anxious?" And you can
Oh,
see
I
it in
love
their
that.
comedy. Yes, in their comedy, I retweet all these funny things that they say, and they are talking about, how they're just kind of explaining, oh, I couldn't do this for somebody because of this, that, and the other. I was too scared that saying no would, so I ended up doing this bizarro thing. And it's really interesting to hear not the edginess, but kind of the rich inner life that these tormented souls are having.
Yes.
I mean, like, are you
Yeah.
like, should you be afraid to kind of just, and I guess you're not afraid of it, but like, can you go away from edgy and just kind of admit that, or kind of go towards the path of your audience being like, yeah, I really love this person. This person is neurotic in exactly the
Right.
same way that I
Their
am.
perspective is relatable. And
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And I think it is definitely something we see in comedy a lot is just kind of pushing the boundaries. And sometimes that can go into being mean or kind of like, you know, yeah, not necessarily being the most kind, but I
Or
like that.
interesting. Isn't it kind of
Yeah,
less than
exactly.
interesting, right?
It's easy to criticize somebody and make a joke of it in some ways. But it can be beautiful if you can kind of reveal your inner perspective and have somebody relate to that and find humor in that shared neuroses. I think that's definitely more the angle that I generally do go at.
Oh, and I get it. And I guess that is, your short film, and remind me of the name, because that seems to be kind of what you're saying, which is that, instead of just having, I want to make a blockbuster film about superheroes, you're like, nah, here's this really original idea that people will be like, hell yeah, I would love to, experience somebody else's central core with a pill. What was the name? Yeah,
Yeah,
what was the
yeah.
name of the short film again?
It's called microdosing you.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm really
And
excited.
everybody's been doing microdosing tweets
I know
forever,
everybody's microdosing everything, so
but
it was of the time to
but
be.
they've never done that. Meaning, like,
They've
that's
not,
how original and maverick it is. Like, I have yet to see a tweet that'd be like, I wish I could microdose all you motherfuckers because you people are weird.
yeah.
And so how does it, like, learning to set boundaries and things like that, and saying no so that your life does not, stops being your own? Because if you say yes to everything, it's like, yeah, you're just doing other people's shit all day long. I can't even imagine how awful that is. But in
Totally.
setting boundaries, how did you also get interested in clowning at the same time, which seems to be kind of breaking through people's boundaries to find joy for them?
Totally. Yeah. So I discovered clowning a couple of years ago. I first was exposed to it. I was living in Portland. I came down to LA to visit my friend, and he was getting deep in the clowning scene here. And I was like, oh,
Is
wow,
there
what?
a clowning scene in LA? This is wonderful. I mean, I guess anywhere
There's
there's a good
a
comedy scene,
huge
there's going to be a
clowning
clown.
scene.
A
Yeah.
huge clown.
I don't know if you've seen the HBO, I think it's a special, or it's a Netflix special, but it's Nate by Natalie Palamides.
Okay.
She is an incredible clown, and I saw her do her solo show here, Laid, and it was mind blowing.
But how is a
And
clowning show different from a one-person comedy show in
it's
that
it
instance?
has a lot more surreal absurdity and maybe a little bit more physical comedy.
Okay.
And sometimes it doesn't follow, what you would see as like a grounded. I mean, there's definitely a narrative with it, but it's a lot more vulnerable and sort of absurdist.
But what's is the show clowning? Is what do you say, Nate? Is Nate clowning on Netflix?
It is, yeah. And it's a character that Natalie came up with, and it's brilliant. So I would suggest that to anybody who kind of wants to get an idea of what clowning is when it's not like, it's not the red nose, circus
Yeah.
clown thing. Cause I think I mean, honestly, when I was first exposed to it and my friend said, you want to come to a clowning workshop? That was my initial thought was, what are you doing? What is this world?
Yeah. So what is it? Like, what are the kind of the initial
Yeah.
core lessons that you're like, holy shit, I didn't know clowning was this? What are the little like,
Yeah.
it's like with
So
improv, yes, and what is the clowning kind of rules and maxims, if there are
Yeah,
any?
so I think they're really varied, but the biggest thing that has kind of set clowning apart from some of the other comedic genres that I've explored has been one is like a connection with the audience. So really trying to engage the audience in your experience. And so breaking the fourth wall constantly. And
Is that like
that
going out into the crowd constantly and just making sure people are fucking, you taking their phone from them and putting it on their lap or in their purse?
it could be anything. It could be so many different things.
I mean, why don't comics do that? I mean, like if they
Yeah.
took one clowning course or seen Nate's on Netflix or seen your show, like, I mean, your next clowning Netflix
Yes.
special, like they would know that they can do that. It's like when Brody Stevens comes out, he just does, he just like, arms cross negative. Like he's like yelling at the crowd to laugh at his jokes, which are not that funny. But he's hilarious because, and when you see that, you're like, I didn't know you could do that. And so like
Right.
with clowning, you're like, some people, everybody should be forced to take an improv course, but also a clowning course, I would think.
I really think so. Yeah. And it really teaches you a lot of vulnerability on stage and going out with it's risking a little bit more of the unknown because there's a little bit more organic discovery that happens. And sometimes it helps to, I mean, clowning, I don't use all of clowning when I do stand up, but there's a lot of emphasis too on clowning, not needing to be about logic. It's more like our animal instinct. So it kind of gets you out of your head, which for me is so helpful with acting and just life in general. Just trying not to get overly worried about what's going on in my mind. And then I can listen to my body, which we don't tap into a lot. And we often ignore our intuition or our gut instincts because we're socialized that certain things that we might have like impulse to do it's not going to be received well. But clowning really encourages you to follow all of your kind of base impulses, which can be interesting and can actually help with setting boundaries. Because I think as a person, we do kind of know what we want and what we don't want if we just listen and tune in to what cues we're receiving from our body. And if we just feel like, oh no, I don't want that. Okay, well, listen to start trusting your impulses and your instincts. And clowning
Wow.
has been really helping me kind of fine tune the instrument of listening to my body and trying to get out of my head. Cause I could convince myself that
Yes.
of anything, I could convince myself that I want to, live a very conventional life and get married and, become I could convince myself to become a soccer mom if I wanted to with my mind, but my body would consistently tell me that's not what I want to do. So, I mean, just
And
a
that's
few.
cool though, because like you would, when somebody be like, they're asking you to do something, and the whole
Yeah.
time your body is saying no, 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 no. And if you just
Yeah.
turned off that logic brain, thinking through the consequences of, oh, what if I said no, this person will be mad, blah, blah, blah. But it's just turning off that brain to where your body skips your brain, goes right to your mouth to say the word no. Like
Exactly.
that must have been pretty
Yeah.
difficult to do.
Yeah. And it
To
really,
skip
clowning
your
really
brain.
teaches you to like really open up to every impulse that's happening. And I feel like it has kind of ripped away that some of those layers of thought that now I can't really ignore what's happening, but I still sometimes do because I don't want to not trust my instincts, but sometimes being overly self-protective can have another it can saying no too much can have another saying it kind of is like staying safe all the time. So
Okay.
sometimes there are some times when I'm like, okay, my body's scared, but I'm not like I'm not in danger. So maybe I'm gonna try this and see what happens. So
Oh, sometimes it kind of like thinking it with your body can be like, oh, why is my, like, yeah, in High Fidelity, he goes, my gut has shit for brains. So
Yeah.
like if you find yourself just having the awful butterflies about something, it's almost like your brain has to pull your body out at that point. But I suppose that's not in responding to people's, asks for your time. It's more, why is this thing scaring me? And so is being present and kind of like you kind of said, I think, where certain things you're kind of supposed to be scared about, or you said something like,
Yeah. I
there's
mean, like
things
getting
that
on
there's things that I'm
stage can
supposed to
be
be, getting on
scary.
stage, like getting on
Yeah.
stage or being in front of a bunch of cameras or whatever. Like, how can you turn your, realize that? And I guess it's kind of an OCD thing where you're like, or I have OCD such that you have to
Yeah.
just be like, you have to realize, okay, this is where the depression kicks in, or this is where the anxiety kicks in, or this is where the OCD
And
kicks
this is
in.
where I embrace it, and I know I'm safe, and I want to just, yeah.
But also to like put that fear aside though, like, yes, there's a bank of cameras like focusing on my every word and movement, things like that. How can I kind of ignore that? Like, that's just a thing I'm supposed to
Right.
be scared of. Let me go inside to my animal instinct and just play around.
Yeah. Yeah. And shut it, because your mind can convince you of how scary it is. And so,
Yeah. So how do you turn that off?
yeah, I mean, that's something I'm still definitely working on. A lot of things for me that help is at time just continuing to put myself in those situations, because the first time I was on stage, my hands were shaking, and now my hands don't shake because I just keep going up there and doing it.
Uh,
Another aspect is just taking care of myself a lot. So trying to meditate and exercise and not go wild with caffeine, which is always a thing that will put you right back in your head, and sugar as well. Um, and then, yeah, clowning has helped me trust, and improv too, trust that I can respond in a moment of uncertainty. I don't have to plan everything. I
yeah.
used to, before I did comedy, I used to have terrible performance anxiety. And when I would plan to give a, presentation for work or something, I would have to memorize everything so verbatim. I would even memorize the first line, which is like, "Hello, my name is Emily." I would just write that down. I didn't trust myself at all. And now it's completely different. I write like a few points I'm gonna touch on, and I don't feel like I need to do that. So I think building on our confidence that we can survive weird situations, and then we start to enjoy it. And the best time I have is always when I'm fully in the moment. And for me, it's just time and developing that inner confidence, and
Yeah.
all of those things. Clowning helps me trust my impulses more,
Yeah, and
because
I think that's happened with me over time too, where you figure out that worry is the worst thing in the world because you have no, like, you're kind of worrying about your future you. But what
right.
sucks about that is you're not there in the scenario to kind of adjust on the fly. And so when you start trusting that you'll be able to deal with, like, over decades of life, because I'm so old, it's like I'm like, oh, I was able to handle that because I was there to
Yeah,
handle that. I was able to adjust on the fly to the circumstances as they arose. And so you have to see the future self and be like, guess what? Your present self is going to be there, and your present self has dealt with all these things in the past. Your present self is good enough to figure those things out. And so over time, you develop skills and chops or whatever, if it comes to being a comedian,
totally.
where you're like, guess what? I've dealt with hecklers successfully for 85 years. And guess
Yeah.
what? The future heckler seems to have hit on the one thing that I haven't really responded to yet. But guess what? I've always adjusted on the fly, and I'll be able to do so at that time. So I shouldn't worry as much.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's why I embrace, sometimes situations where I'm performing and it doesn't go well, or I'm faced with something that I didn't know how to deal with, but I got through anyway,
Yeah.
or doing things I'm afraid of, because that, failure, quote unquote failure, but then also surviving that and wanting to go back up,
Yeah.
it builds a really new pathway in your brain, and it just makes
Yes.
you more confident and more trusting, and you don't have to plan for everything. And you have moments where you go kind of revert back to your old self, and you're like, oh, I want to make sure this is going to go exactly. But that's a cue for me that, okay, I need to let go and remind myself of how far I've come in terms of comfort and being able to take risks. And
But I like building new pathways too, because I think they say the best way to learn things is not to learn it in the same way. It's not to
yeah,
just memorize your name for 1,000 times. It's to say your name in 45 different situations and kind of incorporate new facts into your learning, because then you're almost relearning. It's almost you're cementing that pathway is being cemented with each slightly different iteration. And so just memorizing your name is not enough. You actually have to go out there and say it 4,000 situations.
yeah, absolutely. I love that. And just exposing yourself to a million different things that might scare you and realizing you're totally okay, if not invigorated by it, is
I
so
think
a new a new neural pathway that is much more empowering than the feeling of stagnation when you're, staying when I stay safe, too safe. So I think clowning has helped definitely with encouraging me to take risks, but there's still that moment too with boundaries as well, where it's like, all right, and then sometimes you want to take a moment, take a week to just sort of recollect your thoughts, and that's okay too.
I mean, that's just so cool too, because you're like, you have to expose yourself to things that scare you. And some people are scared of clowns, but it's so funny that you
Yes.
have taught me that one thing to use to conquer your fear is to kind of learn the cardinal rules of clowning, which is to
Yeah.
kind of get out of your head. And so the person who has taught me that is Emily Maverick Shankman, and she's everywhere
Yes.
on social. She's Emily_Maverick, because we remember that her great grandfather just did not brand his cattle. He was like, dude, people know these are my cows, right?
Yeah, exactly. Let them free range. Absolutely. Yeah, I know. I'm so scared of clowns that I decided to become one. I think that's good thesis for where I'm at right now.
And what's the name of the short film, and where can we see that? Are you going to be able to post clips to Emily
Yeah,
underscore
so it's called
Maverick or no?
microdosing. Yeah, it's called microdosing you, and I'll be able to post that. It'll probably be up actually a week from today. So
Good.
stay
Well,
tuned for that.
yes. Well, this episode should post sometime this week, and so people will look out for that. And you'll be posting links via Emily_Maverick.
I will. Yes.
Okay.
And you can also check me out on YouTube. I have some films up there too. So you can check those out as well.
You can see her being present and just forgetting all the cameras are right in her face. Emily Maverick Shankman, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah. Thank you.